Hey, beautiful people, it's me, Daryl, and I'm back after a long hiatus. I think it's been like about a year since I last since I last uploaded a video on here. That wasn't really on purpose, but I guess life got in the way. A lot of things were happening, and I guess I just didn't feel that motivated. But I didn't consciously decide to have that kind of a break. I don't know if the algorithm is like gonna kill me because of the fact that I haven't been on here in forever, that maybe no one's gonna even know this video is up, but I decided, hey, you know what? I had a bit of time today and I just felt kind of motivated to do a video. So today's video is going to be on my Booker shortlist rankings. So obviously the shortlist has come out recently. It came out this past Monday with 6 books. I personally am happy with the shortlist. I know that there are a lot of people who aren't or who are a bit on the fence, but for me personally, I'm happy about it. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you will already know that I have put up this same shortlist ranking up online on my Instagram, but also I have done the Booker longlist ranking. This is the 6th year in a row that I've read the entire Booker longlist and that I've ranked the entire Booker longlist. Like, I call myself the ranking king. I love ranking stuff. It's just what I do. It's what I love. And so I will say that okay, so when I did my predictions, I did a personal shortlist and I did a predictions shortlist. On my personal shortlist, 4 out of the 6 made it. So I'm very, very happy. That means like out of the top 6 books from this long list, 4 of them made it, in my opinion. And as for the predicted shortlist, I also got 4 out of, why am I itching so much? Sorry. I got 4 out of the 6 as well for the predicted shortlist. So I did really well on there too. Now for the 2 that did make the shortlist, the 2 others that are not in my top 6, I did really enjoy. So basically my top 9 made it, like books from my top 9 made the official Booker shortlist. And the 9th book, I actually really enjoy. I gave it 4 stars. I have like no problem with it. I really did love it. And in fact, that 9th book I did predict was going to make the shortlist. Now, this I will say is probably the first year where I actually liked everything on the long list. Like I liked every book on the long list. I didn't feel that there was any dud. Now, I did give like one book 3 stars and another one 3.5 and stuff like that. So it's not like to say I thought they were all perfection, but in comparison to all the other years that I've done this, because I've been reading this since 2019, like the whole long list, there's always at least 1 or 2 books that I actually like detest. And with my luck, always one of those that I tend to detest makes the short list. And so this year, with the fact that I actually didn't have any book that I outright disliked or hated, and also the fact that like books from my top 9 where I actually liked all those 9 books, like 6 of them made it. So I'm happy. Like to me, this year is a solid year. Now, I will say though that overall as a long list, I feel that this is actually maybe one of the weaker long lists that we've had, even though I do enjoy the books. There are some long lists that I can think of where there were some books that really like took off for me and like just wowed me and made me super obsessive. There's like a couple here. Even though I gave, out of the 6 that I gave, out of the top 6, well, the 6 that are on the, that were in my top 6, like my personal top 6, I did give 5 of them, I believe, 5 stars. So it's not like to say, you know, there were no riches on this list. It's just that in comparison to other years, I feel that other long lists have given me some books that like really make me become like a stand for life and really like chew on and just get like super, super excited about and like hyperventilate about. And this year, not as much. But as I said again, I did enjoy the long list. For me, it was not a dud year in comparison to like other years. I mean, in comparison to how some other people feel about the long list in general this year. Now, another thing I'm just going to say really, really quickly is that Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright, which was considered like one of the favorites to make the long list and probably the short list and even to win, was not on the long list, obviously, this year. And I don't think that any book from the long list / short list is as good as this book. I'm not gonna lie, like this is outstanding. But at the same time, I did predict that this was not gonna make the long list because of the fact that I feel like it doesn't have enough mass appeal. And I feel, unfortunately, that even though the judges do try to choose challenging books or what they feel is the best in fiction, I feel like they do tend to go for safer choices. So that's one why I didn't feel it would be on there. And the other thing I think too is that they would have backed themselves in a corner. If they put this on the long list, it would be kind of a hard sell to tell people that you felt that these other books were better than this, or like, or something won over this. I feel like they would have backed themselves in the corner. So I feel in a way too that that's kind of like why this book did not end up on the long list. But yeah, maybe I could be talking out of my ass, but that's sort of like how I feel was their mentality. Just because I feel like it would be very hard for me to believe that none of the 5 would have felt that this was worthy. And unless like this book just wasn't submitted, maybe that's what it was, but I doubt that that's the case. But anyway, let's get into the shortlist ranking because that's what you're here for. And yeah, let's just do it. Like I said, if you have seen my Instagram, you already know what this is, but I didn't really do any reviews really on them. So I guess in ways, this is sort of a way to talk about the books a little bit more, get you a little bit passionate about it. If you haven't read the books, maybe you might feel compelled to pick it up, or maybe you might decide to argue with me in the comments or say like, I totally agree or disagree with what you had to say, or that book was crap or whatever. And I actually prefer like when people disagree with me. And I also love watching or hearing rants about books that I'm passionate about. Maybe I'm a sadist, I don't know, but it's sort of how I feel. So anyway, let's get into it. So in 6th place on my shortlist ranking would be Stoneyard Devotional. This might be a shock to some people because I know a lot of people really love this, and I do too. I thought it was really, really excellent. I gave this 4 stars. When I started reading this book, the book is split into 3 sections. When I started reading the first section, I was convinced that this book was going to be my favorite book on the entire long list. I was convinced of that. And at that point, I kind of felt like I hadn't read that book that was just going to send my passion soaring, like get me into Stan territory. And I was convinced that this was going to do it because that first section to me was very, very strong. It's the second section that kind of like lost me a bit. The third section kind of pulled me back in. But the second section I really, really adore too. And I kind of understand that second section, why it's the way that it is. But anyway, to tell you a little bit about this. So this book is, and I feel like this book might have the best narrator on the entire long list, or the best perspective. Maybe arguably James or Creation Lake, I might say as well. But this had a very, very strong narrator. And what I really liked about this book is because, so we have this woman who is disillusioned with her life, okay? I can't remember if her marriage has broken apart or if she feels it's broken apart. So she leaves behind her husband, she leaves behind her friends and everything, and she goes, this is in Australia, she leaves, I can't remember if she lived in big city Australia, but she goes to a secluded part of Australia, goes and stays at this convent, and she just basically walks away from her old life. And a lot of people are upset, but people that are in her lives like feel so upset and hurt by this decision because she literally just like leaves them and just goes into seclusion at this convent. Now the thing is, the main character, the narrator, is not at all religious. She doesn't believe in any of it. I don't know, I can't remember if she's atheist or agnostic or whatever, but she's just not a believer. And so that was a very fascinating part of the book for me, is this narrator taking solitude in a place that is all about like religious practice, religious teachings, compassion, and all sorts of things that are going on that the narrator in a way is sort of rolling her eyes at. But this is where she's taking solitude. But this is not her moral center or how she feels or how she walks through life. So that was a very interesting juxtaposition, because it's interesting to see someone who's so out of their element choose that environment to sort of find themselves. Now, so the other part is, there's not a lot of plot in this book, but if there is a plot, there's a section where one of the plot points is that there is this nun who's like a superstar nun. Sort of think of like Mother Teresa, but like in today's world. So like very social media oriented, hogging the camera, being at big events and stuff like that. She's like a celebrity nun. And she is coming to this convent. So they're anticipating this superstar nun's arrival. And she will be also accompanying these bones of this nun that they believe had gotten murdered. And she's bringing the bones back to this convent in order for this nun to have had a proper burial. Now, the narrator has history with this superstar nun. And I don't want to get into spoiler territory, but basically they have like a very fraught history. The narrator sort of has like a bit of guilt about how she treated this superstar nun when they were teenagers and things like that. So that falls into play. So you have the narrator who's both fascinated by this superstar nun coming back into her life, but also a bit afraid as well of like what that would mean. And then there's another element of the book where there is like a mice plague, like the convent and the grounds and everything like that are just covered with like mice. Like it's a mice infestation thing going on. And the book is very visceral when it comes to that, very, very detailed. So the second section of this book, which is a bit more fragmentary, really is very repetitive about that. And you just keep reading about these mice. The mice are like found in the food, are found in their bedrooms, in the bathroom, in mouse traps. There's like mountains of dead mice in places and stuff like that. So there's a very unsettling feeling, a creepy-ish kind of vibe to the book, like that's underlying the book. So as much as I feel like this book could have shaved off a lot of pages because I feel it was repetitive, I also feel in a way the repetition is supposed to kind of be there to continue this unsettling feeling. You're not supposed to be able to escape from this. It's like a very claustrophobic vibe. And it's very, very overwhelming, this sense of like the mice infestation, and it kind of is in juxtaposition with this narrator's kind of like unease and dissatisfaction with her life, and also this guilt that she feels towards everything, towards how she treated this superstar nun, and you know. So there's like a lot of underlying tension in the book. The book is a lot more meditative maybe than tension-filled like vibe sort of thing, but it does have a lot of tension going on. That the book is very successful at that. But yeah, so I really, really enjoyed this book. I just personally felt that as much as I was getting a lot out of it, I really did feel it was sort of a repetitive book. And as much as I like when books play around with form and style and stuff like that, and I prefer that sometimes a lot more than just a linear style book, I have to admit, I did like part 1 and part 3 a lot more, and they were the ones that were a lot more like on an emotional level and went into a lot more depth, and you felt like sort of more the day-to-day feeling, and sort of being a little bit stuck in time, where the middle section like jumps around all over the place and is very like fragmentary, but and like very short paragraphs, so it's almost like, you know, trying to get to the point of something, or like just having a bit of meditation here and there and stuff like that. And I just didn't think that worked as well. But overall, like I said, I gave this book 4 stars, and I do feel that as a tension-filled, meditative, quiet book, it really fired on all cylinders, and it was very good. It was very good. And I'm kind of leaning towards thinking that this book is going to be the Booker winner. I don't know why. I just have a feeling that this is probably going to be it. I might change my mind later, but right now I am thinking it's going to be this. And I wouldn't be mad at it, because it is a very, very good book, and I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it. So that is Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. So that would be in my 6th place. fifth place is The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden. Now, this is the book that I think is going to be the biggest pleasurable book for readers. This is the one that out of all of the books, maybe arguably other than James, that has maybe the most mass appeal. For those who didn't know anything about the book, I think it will come as a wicked surprise. It's more plot filled than any of the books that were on the long list. It's a bit of the outlier on the list, I would say. Yeah, you're gonna get like a very potent, engrossing story, full of plot, full of like larger than life characters and stuff like that. And so this is the one that I feel is going to appeal to the masses a lot more. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really, really did enjoy it. It was a great surprise for me. So in this book, we have a character named Isabel. She's very, I'm trying to think of the word, like matter of fact and direct in what she wants and what she thinks she wants and how things should go. Very, very structured, I guess, is the word that I would say. And she doesn't come off as the most appealing narrator when you first start reading this. She's a bit annoying. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who will connect to her character or recognize themselves with that character, but in general, she's very off-putting to a lot of people, or she comes across as off-putting because she's like very no-nonsense, not at all friendly, and very direct in what she says or how she thinks, and that can rub people the wrong way. So she is living in this house that they grew up in this house, and she's remaining in the house. And she kind of isolates herself. The only people she tends to talk to in a big way are her two brothers. One in particular, who I think is the youngest brother, and he, they did have a falling out like a few years back or whatever, but they were very, very close, and they're starting to get close again. And then she has another brother who is just like, he's a womanizer. He's just like constantly with like girlfriend after girlfriend and whatever. They get along. The siblings, I think in general, like if I remember correctly, like they get along pretty well, but she doesn't have as close a relationship to him as she does the other brother. Anyway, the brother who's the like womanizer guy, the one who's always like with a new girlfriend, his new flavor of the month comes to, is in their orbit. And then there's a situation where Isabel, who is our narrator, has to stay with this new girlfriend of her brother's, and the book just takes off from there as the two of them are just together in this sort of isolated place. And then there's a queer love angle that comes into play where Isabel she finds herself starting to have feelings for Eva, who is the brother's girlfriend. Now, there was a thing that at first I thought was going to bother me, because very early on in this book, you get a sense of place of like what time period in history this is. And at first, when it was put into the book, they never really did anything with that. And I was a bit worried of like, is this even going to come into play? Like I kept thinking this throughout as I was reading the book, like, is this going to come into play? Like, why would you have this specific historical element in this book if you're not going to do anything with it? I sort of felt like this was going to be like this strange eventful history that has like a time period, like a sense of a historical thing is trying to talk about, and then only like in the last fourth of the book or something, it starts talking these themes and all that, and I just felt that was a little too late. This book sort of does that too, where later on in the book, it does explore the theme of that historical event, but in this book, it's successful because it's building up to this sort of thing, and when you get to the twist in this book, and it starts to explore the themes of like that particular historical event, you're like, yes, I totally get like why the author did it in the way that it did. It makes sense with the story, where I felt in this strange eventful history, it's kind of like you came in too late with suddenly characters talking about this, when it's like I was expecting that that was going to be a thematic thing in your book, and it seems like you forgot all about that and then you came to it. This book didn't do that. Now, the thing is, this book is going to be one of those things, it's broken in two, and in half. And the first half is like very, very passionate. It's like, you know, full of lust and desire and you know, queer love and like the forbiddenness or whatever of that, like in the time period and whatever, you know, it's not acceptable and this and that, and like the inner demons about the feelings that you have that you can't help feeling, but you feel it's wrong, and like all of that. It has that, and it's just like overly like passionate and like, oh my God, you know, I'm desiring you so much and this, so it has that like feverish feel to it. And then when the second half comes in, there will be no spoilers, it turns this story completely upside down. It turns it on its head, and it becomes this very like dangerous sort of feeling book that has so much turmoil and upset, and where you start to realize too the things that you had thought you were wrong about, or like, you know, this character Isabel has been in the dark about a lot of things, and like there's dark secrets and like all sorts of different stuff. The book really does take that shift. Now, there are some people that I see who absolutely love this book as a whole. Then there's others who think like the first section is great and then the book loses itself. And then there are others who feel that the first section was like kind of like, okay, and then the second section is where this book soared. And I kind of feel that I'm in the second, like in the last camp. The first section, it's really, really amazing. It's a page turner. You feel the passion. Like the author was very good at conveying that. Like you feel the passion. It's like you're turning these pages and it's like you could feel the fire on the pages. It's like your hands are burning kind of thing. Because there's just so much passion, so much desire, so much, you know, unrequited love and like all this sort of stuff. And it's like very potent. Like you're feeling all of it. But I will say though that as much as I felt all of that, it kind of had a very been there, done that feel to it. It was almost a bit cliche how Isabel was thinking, like when she was, like, it's like, yes, I understand that that's how it would be in those days, but it was like, I just kept begging the author, like, give me something different with this. Like, you're doing it well, but you're doing it kind of like how everyone else would tell this story. Like there was nothing different about how those sections felt. It was very well done, like I said, but it was kind of like, okay, yeah, but I've seen this before. Like, what are you doing different with it? It's like, okay, yeah, there's like this repression, this like almost self-loathing in a way, this passion, you know, oh my God, we have to like hide in here. And even a lot of the language and the things that she would be saying were very cliched in how it's like, oh my God, like, oh, my desire, my heart is melting when I see, like things like that, right? But it is done well. But I honestly think that this book really took off when it was the second half, because it didn't take away from that desire, but it gave it an extra weight to it. And that aching now that you felt earlier on takes on a much darker feel. And you can kind of like, it's almost like in a way like you're rooting for even more now, knowing what you know, but you're trying to think of like, how does that make you feel wanting to root for these two, if you get what I mean. Like if you've read the book, you would kind of understand. There's like almost like uncomfortable feeling there, and it's like, yes, I want discomfort in my books, and I just really loved it for that. Now the ending, I'm like, I keep like flip-flopping, like, do I like the ending? Do I not like the ending? I'm kind of right now at the thing of like, I don't really like the ending, because I just feel like the ending, without spoiling it, is maybe a little too tidy, a little too, I wanted to have more of a, like, I wanted the book to end in a way where your brain would sort of be like, really like trying to continue the story in your head of like, you know, how do you think that, like, I don't know, I just wanted a little bit more turmoil there, a little bit more meat to chew on, in the sense of like, it just doesn't feel very tidy as a close. Like you're still questioning something, and there's still a feeling of unease there and whatever. I felt that would have been stronger in my opinion, but this book decided to go a route that was a little bit more like, okay, and now this book has concluded. And, like you could basically see the end, like written at the end. Like that's how it felt like to me. And I just wasn't a big fan of that as much. But in general, this book was like fire. It was amazing. There, like I said, it really conveyed a lot of passion and stuff like that, but it also turns into a story about displacement and mistrust and being sheltered from the actual goings on in the world, and also believing yourself to be a certain way, and then learning that you're actually a different kind of way, or you see yourself as a certain way in history, but maybe you were on the wrong side of history, and like a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, I really do think it's a very powerful book, and I suggest that you pick this one up. It checks off all the boxes. If you're a reader who really loves plot, you're gonna get that. If you're a reader who loves to analyze, you're gonna get that. If you're a reader who loves romance and stuff, you're gonna get that. If you're a reader who loves queer love stories, you're gonna get that. If you're a reader who wants to kind of explore a little bit more about the awful behavior of the awfulness of human behaviors throughout time and history and stuff like that, you're gonna get that. So yeah, The Safekeep by Yael Vanderwooden was a really, really good one. I put this in 5th place, and as a star rating, I gave it 4.5 stars. Very, very good book. Next book that I gave 4.5 stars, and I think people might be a little surprised with this, but unfortunately, this is just how I feel. I gave it to James by Percival Everett. Now, I am a huge Percival Everett fan. In fact, I was reading James. I was gonna say James Percival. James Everett, I mean. Percival Everett, I've been reading him a long time, and I kind of used to rant about this, how come nobody knows about this author? I mean, he's written millions of books or whatever, and it's no one's talking about him. It's critics talk about him, but they kind of downplay him. Best of the year lists and all of these things, they just weren't talking about him. And then finally, he's now in the mainstream. People know who he is, and I'm thank God he's getting his flowers now, finally, So yeah. So with that in mind, I think if I had not read Percival Everett before, this would have been my 5 stars, first of all, and it probably might have been my favorite on this long list. I don't know. But I can't help but compare. And for me, the only reason this book is well, I shouldn't say the only reason, but this is kind of my main reason. Whether you want to call it a bad reason or not, I mean, I don't know. Even for me, I'm thinking that's kind of stupid. But I can't help comparing this to his other books. And for me, this is on the weaker end, and I still love it. I think it's great. Besides maybe Dr. No, and I think Dr. No, if I'm not mistaken, is the book he wrote right before this one. That book is weaker than this. But I think the other books that I've read from Percival Everett just give me a lot more. I don't know. And I guess for that reason, I just couldn't help comparing when I was reading this book how, I don't know, I just didn't think it was as strong as those, and therefore I just couldn't elevate it more than I did. Now, it's an excellent book. So it is a retelling of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Now, I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn years ago, and when I was reading this, and this is the only book that I had read off of the long list before the announcement was made. I remembered a lot of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but not everything. And so I was I'm not gonna read this book again. I just know I'm not gonna read this book again before this one. So I went and I read a summary to kind of give me a refresher. Now, when I did read the summary, there were a lot of stuff that I was oh yeah, I remember that. And then there were other stuff that I was oh, okay, it's good that I did this refresher to give me an idea of certain things when I get into this book. So bear in mind that my criticism isn't necessarily because I read Huckleberry Finn. I think it was a much more pleasurable experience so that you could kind of see the books side by side in a way. But for me personally, okay, so first of all, I'm not even gonna give you like a synopsis of this book because it's like you should know by now, okay? And if you don't, I mean, whatever. But basically, it is told through the slave's perspective. So Huckleberry Finn has a slave. Well, his family has a slave, and it's James. And instead of seeing it through Huckleberry Finn's perspective, like you did in that previous book, this book is through James's perspective. And it totally changes how the way the story is. Now, some people I feel dismiss this book in a way too, because it's like, oh, like, you know, it's just a retelling and whatever. But like, unlike other retellings, this one really gives the book a lot more gravitas, like a lot more potency and urgency to the story. Because, okay, unfortunately with Huckleberry Finn, the character, he's just not like socially or racially mature to be able to understand like what was going on at the time period during that time. And it's like, how could he be, right? I mean, he's not a black man or whatever. First of all, he's a child. And second of all, he's white. So he can never have the same perspective as a black man, a black slave during those times. But what I really like with the book is like, so Huckleberry Finn, as I described, like I wrote this in Goodreads and stuff like that too, is that Huckleberry Finn is an adventure story, and where a story like the way that you're reading James would normally be considered like an adventure story, it's not an adventure story. It's a horror story. It's very interesting to see some of the same scenes play out, but like through the eyes of a white boy, in comparison to this black man and whatever, seeing the same landscape, being in the same situations, being on the same ship, being running away into the same area can have two different perspectives of that very same thing. Yes, you're both living on Earth. You're both alive at this moment in time, but your experiences are so different that the world, it's like, yes, you can see the same trees, the same ship, the same whatever, but they mean different things to both of these different characters. And that's a fascinating thing to look at. That's not like the most original thing in the world. We all know this, that like to walk in someone else's shoes, you're gonna have a different perspective. But it's really done well here. I have to say, I found that was really, really fascinating to see that some of the same things that Huck was seeing, James is experiencing a lot differently. And like where Huck is like, he runs away from his family and his, you know, his parents and stuff like that. And it's like, yes, he's full of turmoil and, you know, there's a lot going on with him as a character. Ultimately, still, this is like a fun little adventure for him because he is allowed that luxury and privilege to be able to have that where he could run off, like run away, do whatever, have an adventure and stuff like that. And ultimately, there is no repercussions or anything that he has to feel, but just doing a big F you to his family. Where for James, it's a survival. For James, it's like every moment that he's on this quote unquote adventure is life-threatening. It's like you could feel the noose around his neck like tightening and tightening and tightening because every encounter, every excursion, every running away from this thing or hiding here or, you know, talking with Huck even or anything like that is like, feels like a death sentence over and over and over and over again. This is just the way that you live. If you could really imagine living a life where you're constantly on your guard, you're constantly in fear. And it's a very interesting element of the book. Another thing too is that I love the fact of like language in this book showing that the book or that James, if you look at James or / Jim, could be considered like bilingual because of the fact that he has to have a voice of when he talks to white people or like black people in general, or like in the context of this book, have a different language when they talk to white people versus the language that they talk when they're amongst themselves. So it's like you have to have like almost in a way like an extra intelligence there of being able to flip-flop between the two. And in ways it's a bit comedic to see when James sometimes slips up and talks in the way that he is amongst his own people, and then you see like Huck's like confused face because he doesn't really understand, or like you see in circumstances like people's alarm at like, oh my god, a black man talking like this. Then there were other elements in here too where you have these like sort of like dream sequences, or like dream sequences of like James talking to like popular thinkers in the world, like people that we study or like talk about, or like philosophers, or like like I said, big thinkers and stuff like that. And that's a very interesting element in the book too. It gives it a little extra oomph to the story, I would say. Another thing is that oh my god, I just kind of lost my train of thought here. What was I gonna say? But anyway, no, honestly though, it's a very, very compelling story. Now, the other thing too is that, okay, yeah, some people say like, because Percival Everett is a satirist. Like, that's just what he does. He's just so good at that. And he's very good at mixing the satire with the dramatic, and then, having moments where you laugh and you feel like you shouldn't be laughing. Or sometimes he just straight up does a drama, and then a satirical element will come in and you'll kind of forget, oh my god, yeah, you know what, you're very good at that tone as well. So there's a lot of switch ups in tones. And I feel too with this book, personally, I feel like that satire did not have enough bite in comparison to some of his other books. Now, there is a book that I read, So Much Blue, which if I think about that, and I love that book, I think that's my favorite book from him. I don't even think that's a satire at all if I think about it. I think that might be a straight up drama. But out of his satirical books, like let's just say in comparison to something like The Trees or something, or Erasure, I feel like he did that a lot better. There's a lot more bite to it. There's a lot more like you are hysterically laughing and you have to come to terms where you suddenly abruptly stop and be like, why am I laughing at this? Or why is this funny? Or you have to think in your head too, like, and sometimes it's an uncomfortable feeling, is like, why is this making me, like, why is this funny? Or why should I be laughing at this? Or shouldn't I be feeling uncomfortable about laughing at this? And I feel like Percival Everett is really good at poking fun at ourselves and making us sort of question like the absurdity of life. And I don't know, in this book, I just don't feel it. So when I hear people say like, oh my god, this was like laugh out funny, and how he's like, it's so hysterical, I see it in ways, but I don't feel it like the way a lot of other people feel it in comparison to some of his other books, where it's like when I think about The Trees, I'm like, that book was satirical the whole way through and had this very slapstick feel to it. And yet it got under your skin so much that it's like you feel sort of sick to your stomach because of what you're reading about. And yet it's like nonstop funny or nonstop satirical and nonstop showing you the absurdity. Where with this book, I felt that that was so much more downplayed, and maybe this suits a story like this a lot more. Maybe that approach suits a story a lot more, but I just couldn't get on to this whole, oh my god, it's like you laugh out loud funny, like completely like, and I'm like, yes, I do see it in a way, but a lot more downplayed. And in fact, I feel like this was a lot more mainstream and more trying to appeal to the masses a lot more than what he normally does, where it's kind of like, I don't care if you get it. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't type thing. This felt a little bit more like coddling to the masses, like, I'm gonna write this in a way that you totally get it. And I think that that was part of my problem. But ultimately, like I said, this was a 4.5 stars book. I honestly think that this was really, really outstanding to read. I gave it 4.5. If this wins the Booker, I'm not going to be mad at it, especially since I'm a big Percival Everett fan. It's like, yeah, I'd have no problem championing this book. It deserves to be there. I know that this is the favorite for a lot of people and stuff like that. And like I said, I did give it 4.5, and it is fourth on this list, but I do think in general, this would make a really, really worthy winner, and it would even give Percival Everett even a bigger platform and like have more eyes on him, which I'm always about. So that is James by Percival Everett. So next book, which I can't believe we're only on number 3, but like, this was a lot longer than I thought, but oh well. So number 3 is Held by Anne Michaels. Now this is a book, there is another book that I would say that on this long list / short list, a lot of people were either really feeling. So this is a love it or hate it book. And in fact, I would say arguably this was maybe the most hated book on the long list, but I absolutely love it. Could it be that it's because she's Canadian? I don't know. But yeah, I really, really love this. But this is why I feel kind of weird even saying that it's a mixed reaction book, because I've seen more hate on the book than I've seen positive. I have seen some people who really, really loved it, but I feel like we're really outnumbered. But yeah, I absolutely love this book. So it's held by Anne Michaels. I read a book from her before, Fugitive Pieces. I don't know how many other books she's written, or I can't remember, but I only had read one, Fugitive Pieces. And I really, really enjoyed that book. I thought it was really, really good, and probably is a stronger book than this one, if I remember correctly. But I read it such a long time ago that I don't quote me on it, because it's like I don't fully remember it all. But yeah, when it comes to this book though, this book is pretty much hard to explain in a way. The best way that I described this book was about desire. I don't know if everyone will agree with that, but for me, it did feel that way, but not desire only necessarily in the way that you think of when you automatically hear that word. But yeah, it's like a book overwhelmingly about desire in all different ways. So desire for love, desire for sex, desire for passion, desire for faith, desire to belong somewhere, desire for the past, desire for your future, desire for wanting to know like where you come from, or like I don't know. I just felt that there was like this overwhelming idea of desire coursing throughout this book. Now, there's a lot more to this book than this, and I'm gonna say something that might seem like I'm unraveling a bit of like what I'm saying, in the sense that there is a lot of it that I can't really fully remember, and I know a lot of people are going to come for me and say, oh, well, that's a sign of a bad book and all that, because if you just read it recently enough, you should be able to remember it all. But no, I found that this book was so pleasurable during the experience, and a book that I really, really want to explore again, and I feel that I'd get a lot out of. But the reason, again, like I say, that I feel that this book has this overwhelming feel of desire in all of its different ways, in all of its different outcomes, or I can't really think of the word right now. My brain is a bit goo right now. But and so when it comes to the writing in this book, very poetic, and abstract at times too. Now, a lot of people, some people like really love the writing, including myself, and then there are some people who feel the writing is like absolutely gorgeous but surface level. There is a booktuber that I follow who I absolutely love. I mean, he was ranting about this book, and I was here for it. Like, as much as I love it, I love to see opposing opinions, and I love it when people say their opposing opinions with like a lot of like, they're backing it up in a lot of ways. That's always exciting to me. And I remember the Disco King, he said, like there was a part where he was talking about how this book, and there's another book on this shortlist, that are just designed to be pretty. Like you could turn to any page and read a paragraph, and their only purpose is to be pretty. And in a way, I can sort of see that. Like, I do get that, and I feel that's very, very valid to say, and it's like, you know, he's not the only one who's saying that. But for me, I feel in a way that this language, and maybe like, again, maybe I'm talking out of my ass, and maybe too, I'm putting a lot of like, you know, intention on Anne Michaels' part, and it's like, no, I'm just like a really good poet and whatever, and I'm just gonna write fancy paragraphs. But for me, I feel that writing style really matches very well with the way the themes of this book are, and that overwhelming feeling. So like the overwhelming of this flowery language that's like all encompassing and like very, like, you know, almost like in a way over the top, and very, it's like you can't get away from it sort of thing, I feel is intentional, or at least I'm putting it as intentional to the way this story is told, about this overwhelming feeling about like your purpose in life, and about like your past loves and your passion and your sex. Because there's a lot of, I feel like, romanticism, like a lot of romantic feelings in this book too, like where you feel a lot of that passion, unlike like in The Safekeep, where it's very I don't want to say surface level, but it's very much like this unbridled like passion and desire, and it's like I need to let it out. I need to let it out. This one is it's in a similar in a way where it's like a bit of an overcompensation or like overwhelming for the individual, but done in a way like where it's like this longing for something, and it's you're feeling in a way like you don't really know how to express that or how to get it, but it's just like this need that you feel. And I feel, like I said, I feel the language conveys that, because it just has this language that it's impossible to get away from. You might be rolling your eyes like when you read the language, depending on like what you took out of it or what you took out of the prose, but it's you can't escape it. It's inescapable, the language. Like, you see where some other books you could read and you have like these pretty passages, or, you know, something that you just like feel like you want to quote at times and whatever, but you know, there's like a balance here. This book doesn't have balance. It's really like all out there, like this kind of overwhelming language. Sometimes it's even hard to understand like what's happening. Sometimes you feel like there isn't any depth to what's happening or whatever. I didn't really personally feel that, but like in ways I feel like this book is one of these books that, depending on certain readers, might race through it because the language is just so delicious. You just want to eat it up, eat it up, eat it up. Like you're just like going to town on it. And then there's other ones where it's like this book forces you to stop. It forces you to slow down and really take in what it is that you're reading. But like, again, I say, I don't think that it's possible for like anyone to read this book and get everything from it right away. Or like, you know, the imagery or stuff like that. It's not one of those things where it's like, yeah, you know what, I totally got all of that by the end. Now I know that there are some people who are not going to pick this book back up again because they just feel like, no, I did it once and I'll never again. But personally, I feel I would want to read this book again because I just kept picking up on this feeling of desire. That was just something I felt that was just coursing throughout this book. There's a section in here too, like where there's like imagery in here that I really, really absolutely adore. And there's one part, it's pretty early on, where there's like a photographer. He's taking these photos of like his customers. Like there's a person who comes in and it's like, you know, they want their photo taken. And this is like a long time ago. So it's like, you know, you go to a professional photographer, they take the photo, then they go and they develop it. You come back a few days later to pick it up and all sorts of stuff. And what happens is like he takes a picture of, okay, like for first example, it's like he takes a picture of this man, and then the man, like he goes and he develops it, and when he develops the photo, there is a person in the photo next to this man that he took of, and that man was not there. I don't remember if it was a man or a woman, I can't remember, but there was another person there who was not present at all, and it kind of freaks him out, and then this starts to happen a little bit more, and I just felt like, I'm not going to spoil something about that plot point, but that overwhelming feeling again of desire is like, at least the way it's presented to you at first, is that a lot of these people who are showing up in these images, who may be ghosts or whatever, has a connection to the person who the photo was originally supposed to be taken of. And there's like a longing on that person's part to be with that person still, or like, you know, they're still thinking about them, or they had such a huge impact in their lives, or they shaped who they were, and all sorts of stuff. And that again kind of like makes me think again, like this thing has this intentional thing with this language, is there's this overwhelming beauty and desire to be maybe somebody else, or to recapture something that you've lost, or something that you feel you've missed, or a path maybe you feel that you regret you didn't take. I don't know. I just thought that this book was miraculous. I loved it so much, and the language was a big part to do with it, but also a lot of the imagery. And it's also one of these books where I feel like a reread is going to be such a glorious experience. So that is Held by Anne Michaels, and that is number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list is something I was genuinely surprised about. I will say this is the surprise on the long list for me, and I'll tell you why. But that is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. Why this is a surprise for me on this long list, like the long list in general, and well, not like why it's a surprise to me that this is like one of my favorite books off of the long list / short list. And in fact, this was number 2 on my overall long list ranking is because I have tried reading Rachel Kushner before, and this is an author I just did not like before. I never got on with any of her books. I read The Mars Room a few years ago, which was shortlisted for the Booker a few years back, and I did not like that book. I DNF'd The Flamethrowers, which I just couldn't do it with that book. Like, I was like, I can't, like, this is just, I can't, you know? And then there's another book from her, Cuba Telex something, I can't remember what it's called, and it was like, no, God, no, ugh, no. And then I read The Hard Crowd, which was an essay collection from her. And that one I said, I didn't love it, but that was the book that kind of cemented to me, like, I'm never gonna read a Rachel Kushner book ever again. Well, fast forward to the future where I had to because of the Booker long list, and I was groaning when I first saw this, even though I did pre-order this book because something about the premise sounded so interesting to me. But I was like, even when I bought it, I was kind of like, when I pre-ordered it, I was kind of like, will I ever read it? But then the Booker judges had plans for me, and it's like, oh yeah, oh well, bitch, you're gonna read it, type thing. So yeah, so I had to read this. But when I read The Hard Crowd, which was nonfiction, and there's a significant reason why I'm bringing that up, is that that was the book that kind of cemented to me, like, Rachel Kushner is not for me, and I'm never gonna read anything from her again. Like, and that's okay. Like, I wasn't even mad about it or whatever. I was just like, you know what, sometimes there's some writers that's just not for you, and you just have to accept it. And that was the case for that. But then the other thing too is when I was reading it, I said to myself, well, and I wrote it in my Goodreads. I think I wrote like a really small review of that book. I said like, oh, you know, or did I do it on my Instagram? I can't remember. But I said that how, oh, you know what? I have to admit though that I do prefer Rachel Kushner's nonfiction over her fiction because it was much better to me. So then here comes this book, and arguably, you would say that this is a mashup of like fiction, nonfiction, because a lot of the quote unquote nonfiction elements in the book, if you've read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, were the most compelling in this book. So it's like, yes, when she's talking about like real life subjects or like showing the research of these subjects, I find she's way superior. Although now I feel like I can't really say that because now I read a fiction book of hers and it's like, oh my God, I adore this book and I love that even more than The Hard Crowd. Now, here's the thing. Okay, so this book is about a secret agent who is like, she's a spy and she has been hired to infiltrate this eco group, like this eco organization. And they're worried that that eco organization might have plans for eco-terrorism. So our main character, whose name is Sadie's job is to go in there and see if they really are anarchists, if they're trying to pull off some set of eco-terrorism, and to, you know, kind of, I guess, entrap them, sort of thing. Now, so something I'm gonna say here is that a lot of people have said that this book has like no meat. So there's either, yeah, the camp that says it has no meat, it's very surface level, or it's just, there's no depth, okay? And then there are others who feel that the book is kind of split up into like alternating chapters in a way, sort of like show you like, you know, one part is about the spy thriller part, and then the other part is these emails that she's reading that has more of this nonfiction feel to them. That they're two separate books, they don't mash well together, and you know, it just doesn't come all together. And I have to disagree with that because I honestly think that one thing that I will say, and I've been seeing so many people like talking about this in ways, and I'm like, yes, it's what we were conditioned to think. This is what I truly believe, is that when I read the synopsis for this book and I learned that it was about a spy, I was conditioned to think that I was going to read about this really excellent spy. And I honestly feel like when I've come across some people's like reviews or people talking about this, I think we were all conditioned to feel that. It's like automatically when you hear about a spy, we have been conditioned to think that every spy out there is just so good at their job, so perfect. They are one step ahead. You're going to be reading about someone who's just basically untouchable. And you don't really get that with this, because there's a lot of times that you have to really question, is Sadie really a good spy? Is she really bad at her job, actually? And that was kind of like a welcome surprise to me, because I did not see that coming. And the more you think that way and the more you read this book, the more entertaining and the more insightful it becomes about people who believe that they're maybe like on the right side of history or have the right way and are untouchable and they know exactly what they're doing, and perhaps are a lot more delusional. There's a lot of things too. So you have a section here about like where she's reading these emails by one of the leaders of this eco group that she's trying to infiltrate, and he's talking about a lot of stuff like different species in the world throughout history. So like, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals. I can't remember what that other one was, and that was actually fascinating to read about too. And I found that juxtaposition was really good with the character of Sadie and her spy thriller element, because she's reading these emails and Sadie is she's so convinced that she's in control at all times and she knows what she's doing, and like no one could get at her or like undermine her or throw her off her game or anything like that. But I find the book has a lot of things of like where you're wondering who's really seducing who really is in control, who really is the one who is the follower here, who's the one who's in total control, and like or the one who's the leader versus the follower. And I found that was really, really interesting. And it is in juxtaposition with when you're reading about these like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and stuff like that. It kind of draws a lot of conclusions too of like, doesn't mean that because something is a ruler or a ruler species or a ruler in life and stuff like that, sometimes we're conditioned to believe that they're going to be the elite or the ones we should follow or the ones who are right or the ones who got things done or the one who is showcasing the way things should be done. But perhaps that's not really true at all. And in the book, reading about Sadie, reading these emails and stuff like that, and she's like starting to adopt a lot of the things that she's reading about in her daily life. It's kind of like you start questioning, are you really that in control? Maybe the emailer is the seducer of you versus you thinking that you're the one in control. So I just thought that was a really, really amazing element of the book. Yeah, like honestly, like it had some stuff about like these Neanderthals and stuff like that I was just so fascinated and gripped by. And there's a part where they're showing, I can't remember exactly the details, but it's like talking about Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and the two different ways that they lived in the world and how they function in the world and how they survived in the world. And it's like when you're reading it, there's kind of like a way that makes you wonder, okay, yeah, Homo sapiens are the ones that came out of this in a huge way type thing, like because we're now still here and Neanderthals aren't. But was the way Neanderthals were living and stuff like that really the wrong way or the not so elevated way? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's just because Homo sapiens are the one that stuck around, is that why we believe that Homo sapiens were the more intellectual ones and the ones who were a lot smarter and all sorts of stuff. But perhaps that's not really the case. And I just thought that was really interesting. And then there's a part too with the Neanderthals when they're talking about how in ways sort of like, I guess, kind of insinuating that Neanderthals mated with Homo sapiens. So like we all have a little Neanderthal in us and stuff like that. I found was a very interesting theme too as well, because when you're seeing Sadie sort of take on a lot of these ideas in her day-to-day life and, start making mistakes and like all sorts of different stuff, you're kind of like, yes, a lot of times we take for granted that the people who are the elite or the rulers and stuff like that, sometimes the other ones or the followers, there's elements of that fall into their way of living as well. Some of the teachings that we're learning as well were not necessarily from only the intellectuals. It's from learning from the other side. I don't know. Maybe again, like I'm talking in like, maybe I'm putting like way too much onto this book that it doesn't have to offer, but I personally felt this way. I loved this book and I loved reading this narrator. I loved how acidic and how Awful she was at times. I do love unlikable characters, and you're not, I mean, this is probably the most unlikable one on the whole long list slash short list. But yeah, I just thought this was an excellent, excellent read. I think that this is amazing. I'm so glad. I predicted this would make the short list, and I'm so glad that it did, because I just knew it. This was one of the books that I was like so sure was going to make it, and a lot of people were like, no, that's not going to. But yeah, I feel this book has a lot to offer. I honestly feel this is a future classic in the making, and I feel that this would benefit on rereads, and I also feel like there's a lot more to offer than people are taking it for. It's a book that you could honestly take on a very surface level way, and it would be entertaining enough and stuff like that, but just dig a little bit deeper and you'll start seeing parallels and start like really finding that the structure of this book to me is fascinating. I find the structure for this is perfect because it's almost like it starts to merge into a cohesive piece. It seems so jarring at first, like, oh, here we go with the spy thriller. Here we go with the Neanderthal emails. Here we go with the spy thriller. But then it for me, it starts to slowly merge and you start to wonder who's really controlling who. These emails now seem to take on a lot more of a potent feel over the book than they initially did because of what you see Sadie start to do. Anyway, love this book. Think it's great. If this won, I would be ecstatic. Yeah, Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, definitely a good one, and this is number 2 on my shortlist ranking. And now we're gonna go for number 1. So if you did Process of Elimination, you would know. If you also follow me on Instagram, you'd already know too, but some people are going to be screaming because they cannot stand this book, but I absolutely loved it, and that is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This was number 1 on my shortlist ranking, and it's number 1 on my long list ranking, meaning I thought that this was the best book out of the 13. Now, if you had asked me this before reading, I would not have believed that. It was one of the books that I was kind of like, I'm curious about it, but I'm not so sure. But I just thought that this was amazing. It's very bite-sized, very, very small, tiny book. So when I was talking about the long list in general, and I said this was a lot more of a mainstream long list, and it is. Like, there's no getting around to it. It is. It's one of those long lists where most people heard of most of the books, and most of the books were very, very available. Now, I live in Canada, so like in North America, I'm accustomed to like every long list. There's at least maybe like 5 or 6 books or something like that, maybe even more, that you need to order overseas, right? So like, you know, I'll order from Blackwell's or like Book Depository when that existed and stuff like that, have it delivered to my house. And it'd take a while before the books would arrive, obviously, right? But this year, there literally was only one book that was, besides like Creation Lake and Playground, which were not like published at the time, but that were gonna be published right away on their pub date in Canada. Stoneyard Devotional was the only book that was not available locally. So that just goes to show you just how much of a mainstream book it is and why like there's so many people who were jumping on the fact of being able to read the long list because it was so accessible to get. It was so accessible, it was right there. But the reason why I'm bringing all of that up, that whole long tangent, was to say that this is the UK cover of Orbital. And this is because this book I did not realize was available locally. So I ordered this along with Stoneyard Devotional to come to my house and had to wait forever for Orbital to show up. But I have to say I'm glad because this UK cover is superior to the US Canada version, like by far. So I'm really, really glad. But anyway, when this arrived, I was shocked by the size because I did not know it was a short book. And when I got it, I was like, this is super light. Like, you don't even need to be lifting weights or anything to pick this up. And I was like, okay, like looking through it, I was like, it's 100 and something pages. Like, it was genuinely shocking. But yeah, bite-sized book, so much to take from this book, at least for me. Now this book, along with like a book like Held and whatever, is another one of those books that are considered pretty writing with not a lot much depth or soul to it. I disagree. I just thought that this book was super fantastic. So you follow like 3 astronauts. I mean, one's a cosmonaut, I think. Well, not I think. It's just I'm trying to remember if there's 2 of them. Like 2 Russians or 1, I can't remember. But it's 6 or 8 astronauts. Oh my god, that's really bad. I'm not really doing a good sell if I can't remember that. But the characters are not important in this book, to be quite honest with you. It's more about vibes. But anyway, yeah, so you have them and they're orbiting, like they're up in space and they're orbiting around the world, and like you're seeing the world from the viewpoint of like astronauts, like from up in space. And it has this feeling of like, the world is infinite, like we're all tiny little specks in the world and whatever. And I mean, yeah, some people are groaning at like, oh, that's so obvious and stuff like that. But I just thought that this book had a lot of beauty to it. Now, this book, I would say, kind of tackles subjects to me. Maybe some people don't feel that's obvious or not, but like sort of like, environmental issues, climate change and stuff like that. Like that's a very urgent thing on our mind these days. And this book does that in a kind of different way than what is expected. Now, a thing I will admit to you is that normally a book that's like eco-fiction, this I wouldn't necessarily say is eco-fiction per se, but has elements of that, don't usually work for me, eco-fiction. Now, the reason I'm going to say this is because I don't mind reading nonfiction on like about ecological problems or the crisis and stuff like that, or watching documentaries on it. But for fiction, I find, and this is me, like this is what I think, is that most writers who decide to write like an eco-fiction are just not subtle, and it drives me nuts. For some reason, it's like you could be subtle with any subject matter, but when it comes to that, it's like very on the nose. And yes, I know that these are important issues. We need to be informed, and it's a problem, and it's like people aren't taking it seriously. And I understand that, and I want people to take it seriously. But I feel like writing these books, like where it's like, writers will like, characters would like go on these rants, and it's like suddenly it becomes like inaccessible. And I'm thinking of like Burnham Wood, for example, is like one of the biggest offenders of this, where it's like, there's a character named Tony and he suddenly starts like ranting, like pages and pages of this rant. And it's like, can you not do better than this? Can you not convey this, or even have that Tony character convey this, but in a lot more subtle thing, something more to chew on, something more potent, something more razor sharp or something, than having just these rants and these very obvious, unsubtle statements? And then like, so yeah, Burnham Wood I'm thinking of, like The Overstory is another one, A Children's Bible, like these are just a few. So with a book like this, I feel that this book did it differently. It kind of made me feel, almost like insignificant. It's like I'm a little speck out there. It gave me a lot of existential, vibes, like an existential crisis. Kind of made me horrified almost in ways too. It kind of shows you the dynamic between like borders too, and like how we treat each other as like, I'm a citizen and you're a non-citizen, this is how we feel. Like it kind of shows that too in sort of like maybe comedic silly ways too, like, there's different bathrooms on the spacecraft. And it's like, even though the astronauts on there don't care, they just go to the bathroom. Like when they need to go to the bathroom, they're just gonna go to whichever one. The idea that there are separate bathrooms for like the Russians versus like the Americans and all that is just a crazy concept, but it kind of shows in ways to the ridiculousness of how we live and how we try to differentiate ourselves from like different people and label those as other or can't be a part of, or we have like this very what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, geez, I can't think of the word, but like, when you, oh my God, why can't I think of the word? But like when you have pride in where you live in and you're like a patriot, type thing, patriotic type of thing going on there and stuff like that too. But it also has this thing about like showing you the way the world is, the differences in the world, the beauty of the world, watching it from a different perspective, like somewhere out in space and whatever, you can kind of see more of the gorgeous things of the world, but also more of the problematic elements of the world, like from the environment and like this fear almost in a way that we're destroying ourselves and stuff like that. I found that was really, really well done. Now, I'm going to say a little hot take here that I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with, but I personally found that the prose in this book, when I was reading it, as I was going along with it, it felt very, very Virginia Woolf to me. Okay, now, I know that some people's heads might be exploding right now because I said that, but I personally felt it felt very Virginia Woolf-esque. Now, the reason I'll say this is it reminded me of two works in particular, To the Lighthouse and The Waves. Now, The Waves, I've never completed it. I mean, I have it and I need to read it. But the reason I know a bit about the passages in The Waves is like when I was in English Lit, because I'm in English Lit, like that's my degree. We studied a bit of like the waves and stuff like that. And that sense of like repetition, like within the characters and their viewpoints, they're all looking at the same thing, but sometimes like looking at the same thing, you discover something different than the other person might not have discovered. And there's just continuous thing of like looking at exactly the same thing, like almost in a static way, but all of us experiencing it a little bit differently or adding on to that last person's thoughts. I felt that this book had a lot of that. And also To the Lighthouse too, where into The Lighthouse, it's like the setting is the characterization. The characters don't matter. The characters are there, but you're not gonna like walk away from that book thinking about the characters or the characterization, because the setting is the characterization. The setting is the mood. The setting is what drives the story across. It's what the people inhabiting that space is what matters. And in both of those Virginia Woolf books too, like where there's no clear set of like who the narrator is or what characters are thinking, you just bounce from one thing to the other. And it almost like in a seamless way when you're not aware of when you're having a different sort of thought or when you're being taken on a different journey of somebody else's thoughts or their addition to like what they're seeing or what they're analyzing and stuff like that. I felt that this book did a lot of that. I don't know, but for me, it really did feel Virginia Woolf-esque. Now, another thing I'm gonna say, and this is not like a criticism against people, but it's just something that I've noticed, is that a lot of times when contemporary fiction or, okay, I'm not even gonna put the label of contemporary fiction, but I'm gonna say like books that come out now, whether it's a historical fiction book, a contemporary fiction, a literary fiction, a science fiction, or whatever, but books that come out now, people tend to be a lot harder on, in the sense of there's almost like this idea of it cannot be as great as the greats. You know, the people that came way before us who wrote are just automatically going to be better and are a canon and are just, you know, untouchable. And I am a big classics lover person and whatever. So it's like, you know, I'm barking up that tree too. But we have this tendency to act like newer books cannot pull that off. So for me, there's a lot of times, and I say this to many people, I have this thing like where if Virginia Woolf right now was like existing, wrote like To the Lighthouse, published it now, a lot of people who love that would be bringing it down and saying like it's pretentious, there's like not much to add, you know, the characterization was really poor, it was just pretty writing, it's soulless, it's whatever. But because it's Virginia Woolf and it came from before, now there is a sense of like a sense of admitting though that, hey, you know what, you were able to write that in your time period, and now maybe there's a falseness to when people like try to repeat it because it's like the formula was already done, try to do something different. There's an argument for that, but at the same time, like I said, I just feel like it's a timeless book, and then people will praise it because it's a timeless book, but if that book were to come out right now today, people would be bashing it. Like it's just a given. People would just be like, this is absolute nonsense. This is gibberish. This is like meaningless. This is soulless. Oh, you just want to write pretty words and stuff instead of trying to go a little bit deeper. Now, again, that's not a slight or like, you know, me trying to be shady to people or whatever, because ultimately I'm not saying like, hey, you know what, if you don't like Orbital, like that's who you are. Because there are a lot of people that I trust, a lot of people who, you know, who read this book and just think that it's absolute garbage, that it's just pretty writing, nothing, like it's soulless, depthless, it's, you know, toothless, whatever you want to call it. But personally for me, like I said, there was just so much beauty to this. I felt the writing was beautiful. It conveyed a lot of like emotions out of me. It did eco-fiction justice in the sense of here's how you do something a little bit different. Here's something of how you highlight the world as beautiful and gorgeous and something that we should be protecting without it being very preachy and unsubtle and, ranty and all of that. Just make a glorious, beautiful book that, like, me personally, I could eat up and like just chomp on. Yeah, but I absolutely thought Orbital was fantastic. It's beautiful, loved it. Short, little, tiny little package. Again, like, the characterization isn't important in the book, but it does give you different, ways of thinking culturally, how people think versus the way your culture thinks. But also, like, the how amusing and how pathetic it is in ways too that we treat our neighbor as different, or othering them. And also too, just showing how beautiful and glorious this planet is, and also giving that heavy feeling of dread and existentialism to us, because it has this sort of like claustrophobic feel by being in this rocket. Also, this feeling of like this dizzying kind of feeling too, of like looking down at the earth in this sort of way, because even some of the ways Samantha Harvey describes like the globe and how it is, there's like this almost like fearful sort of like, ooh, I feel like I'm tipping over the edge. It's kind of giving you like, whiplash a little bit, or like if you're afraid of heights type vibe. Yeah, I honestly, like I said, I really, really think this is a fantastic book. I would say please, please, please give this a chance. Now, it's not going to be for everyone, like I said, but that's just how it is, and that's just how my feelings were on the book. Yeah, so Orbital by Samantha Harvey, thought this was excellent, and yeah, this was my number one on my long list and on my short list. So this is the one that I'm hoping will win. Honestly, like I said, I don't mind if any of the 6 win. I really don't. That's not like a hollow statement. That's actually the truth. And I actually think my least favorite out of the 6 is going to be the winner. Right now, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to say right now that Stoneyard Devotional is this year's Booker Prize winner. Which will be kind of cool too, in a way too, since Australia has not been on the long list for quite some time. 7 years, 8 years, something like that. So just to recap, I guess we'll say is that Orbital was number 1. Creation Lake is my number 2 pick. Held is my number 3 pick. James is my 4th pick. The Safe Keep is my 5th pick. Stoneyard Devotional is my 6th pick. And if we're gonna be truthful here, this should have been on the long list, but I'm not one of those people for drawing things out on whatever. It's like, I accept it's not on the long list, and that's cool too. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Can you please tell me what your experience with this year's Booker long list was, or how do you feel about the short list? It's a good short list, bad short list, trash, or goodies? And like, what's your number 1 pick? What do you think's gonna win? What should win? What do you want to win? Or did one of your favorites not make the list completely? Oh yeah, I forgot to mention The Friends was my 3rd favorite book on the short list, so I'm kind of a little bit like sad about that not making it, but I still have to say I do love the short list, so I'm not that mad compared to other people. And I did put in my Instagram post that the cream of the crop for me, and I think a lot of people will be like, ugh, like your taste is crap, but was Orbital and Creation Lake. Those were the 2 books that I really, really cared, like, please be on there. They were on my personal short list and they were on my predicted short list, and I'm just so glad that those 2 are on there. If they're gonna win, I don't know. Right now, like I said, I think it's gonna be Stoneyard Devotional, but obviously I'll be ecstatic for those 2. And if you put a gun to my head or something like that, I'm gonna say like, okay, I hope one of those 2 win. Either Orbital or Creation Lake, mostly Orbital. But anyway, that's all that I got for today. This was a really long video. It's like 1 hour and 18 minutes. And because I don't edit, it gonna be 1 hour and 18 minutes. Anyway, but thank you so much for watching, and love you always. Peace and love. And yeah, hope to see you in the comments, and I hope to make more videos sometime soon. Love you always. Bye.